And thank you to my good friend, Secretary Hegseth, who I've long admired, but I've gotten to know personally in the last number of months. And he is as fine a gentleman and as fierce a warrior as you will ever meet. And we've all learned to put our faith and confidence in his leadership of the War Department. So thank you, Pete. There's been a paradigm shift under President Trump in the Western Hemisphere in the last 14 months. Some of that was touched on by the earlier speakers, but just to restate it, we are not going to cede an inch of territory in this hemisphere to our enemies or our adversaries. Our national security, our homeland security, the safety and well-being of our people begins at home, begins in our neighborhood, begins in our home region. And for too long, we have allowed foreign enemies, foreign adversaries, and enemy terrorist organizations to control territory and spaces in this hemisphere where they can project power, project threats, and directly threaten the lives of your citizens and our citizens. And so under the leadership of President Trump, we are using hard power, military power, lethal force to protect and defend the American homeland. Not a single one of your nations should tolerate the existence of a single square mile of territory that is under the control of any entity other than the sovereign governments of your country. The idea that we would have in this hemisphere area that are under the physical control of foreign terrorist organizations, paramilitary organizations, is completely unacceptable. The cartels that operate in this hemisphere are the ISIS and the Al-Qaeda of the Western Hemisphere, and should be treated just as brutally and just as ruthlessly as we treat those organizations. What we have learned after decades of effort is that there is not a criminal justice solution to the cartel problem. There are elements of the problem that require a criminal justice solution, to be sure, but just as we fought Al-Qaeda and fought ISIS with the tip of a very lethal spear, the reason why this is a conference with military leadership and not a conference of lawyers is because these organizations can only be defeated with military power. And I see some heads nodding up front because they understand. You're dealing with a lot of lawyers in your own country, I'm sure. You have my permission not to listen to them. The key condition of human flourishing, of prosperity, is order and security. A country cannot pursue economic growth, cultural enrichment, art, architecture, education, science, if it doesn't have fundamental security first. And for too long, we've been caught in a vicious cycle in this hemisphere where countries from Mexico down to the tip of South America do not provide their citizens with basic physical security. So those citizens, in search of economic opportunity, illegally immigrate to the United States. They pay the smugglers, they pay the cartels, who then grow richer, who then go more powerful. And then your countries, in turn, become poor because you've lost your citizens, you've lost your human capital, you've lost your opportunities to develop and to grow. So you get poor, the cartels get more powerful, nothing changes, nothing improves. You have to break that cycle. You have to completely sever it. And that begins by dismantling these organizations that deal drugs, deal violence, assassinate, extort, blackmail, and also traffic illegally in human beings. That is a form of terrorism too. Illegal immigration facilitated by criminal networks is a form of terrorism. And those who are stealing your children and stealing your families and stealing your human capital are part of that terrorist continuum and should be thought of as such. It is not a victimless crime when people are paying human smuggling organizations, because that money then fuels assassinations, it fuels violence, it fuels instability, and it continues this cycle. For decades, a lot of organizations were sent to your countries. These are known as NGOs. I think you know the term, non-governmental organizations. And they gave you very, very bad advice for a very, very long time. And basically, they told you, in short, that you needed to be softer and gentler and nicer to the criminals, and that you had to demilitarize your approach and extend more rights and more opportunities to the people who are sabotaging and destroying your society. I would make the point to you, as others have pointed out before, including the president of El Salvador, that the West only achieved the place that it did in human history because it spent previous centuries eradicating the criminal elements within its territories. So the West that we came to know, that had the great music and architecture and science and the most powerful economy, it had spent centuries previous to that establishing order first, so that by the time you get, to say 18th century England, 19th century England, there have been centuries of previous history in which ruthless means were used to get rid of the people who were raping and murdering and defying established systems of order and justice. And then when people could live freely and peaceably, and children and families and women could be safe, then it became possible to pursue all of these higher elements of life. So when people who are coming to countries like yours that have had struggles and difficulties and pains and challenges, and they're telling you anything other than first and foremost, secure your countries and your territory, they're giving you not only terrible advice, but advice if someone had come to Europe centuries ago and they had followed that advice, Europe would have never become the Europe that it eventually became. And the reason why many Western countries are struggling today is they've forgotten the eternal truth and wisdoms they once followed. And that's why here under President Trump in America, we are returning to those fundamental truths. We're returning to those fundamental principles. So I'll just close by saying that you will have in President Trump, in the White House, in the Department of War, the Department of State, and the whole of our government, unwavering support, unwavering commitment and fidelity in achieving this mission, which is very simply to eradicate the criminal cartels and terrorist organizations, to deprive them of control of weapons, spaces, institutions, and territory. And the human rights that we are going to protect are not of the savages that torture and rape and murder. The human rights that we are going to protect are of the peaceable citizens who have an absolute human right to live in physical safety and security every day of their lives. And in that mission, I promise you, we will be your closest partner. Thank you.